Dr. Vrelix pressed her four-fingered hand against the cold glass of the observation chamber. Behind the transparent barrier, the human subject sat calmly in a chair, connected to dozens of sensors that measured every electrical impulse in his brain. She had studied hundreds of species across the galaxy, but nothing had prepared her for what the data was showing her today. The Galactic Research Institution had been operational for 3,000 years. It was the most respected scientific body in the known universe, staffed by the brightest minds from every member species of the Confederation. They had mapped the consciousness patterns of the Velthrani, decoded the hive mind communications of the Swarm Collective, and even documented the strange dream state learning of the Morphians. But humans were different. Humans were something that should not exist. Senior researcher Crix stood beside Dr. Vrelix, his insect-like compound eyes fixed on the holographic display that showed the human's neural activity in real time. The patterns were impossible. Every time the human learned something new, his brain physically changed. Not temporarily, like other species. Permanently. The human subject was named Marcus Chun. He was a 32-year-old engineer from Earth who had volunteered for the study after the Confederation made first contact with humanity just 18 months ago. He seemed completely unaware of how remarkable he was. To him, learning was just something humans did. He could not understand why the alien scientists kept asking him to perform simple memory tasks over and over again. Dr. Vrelix turned to her assistant. Her voice was barely above a whisper. She told him that she needed confirmation of the readings. The assistant checked the sensors 3 times before nodding. The readings were accurate. The human brain was creating permanent pathways. In every other known intelligent species, memory was a temporary state. The Velthrani stored information in chemical compounds that slowly degraded over time. Without regular refreshment, their memories simply faded away. The Crix species kept their knowledge in specialized organs that could be damaged or destroyed. The Morphians had to enter dream states every few days to reinforce what they had learned, or they would forget everything. But humans did none of these things. When Marcus learned something, his brain physically restructured itself. Neurons grew new connections. Chemical bonds formed that were almost impossible to break. The knowledge became part of his physical being, written into the very architecture of his mind. The implications were staggering. Dr. Vrelix had Marcus perform a simple test. She showed him a sequence of symbols from an ancient Velthrani language that had been dead for 10,000 years. Marcus studied the symbols for just a few minutes. Then she removed the display. 3 hours later, she asked him to reproduce the symbols. He did so perfectly, without hesitation. A week later, she asked him again. Perfect reproduction. A month later, perfect again. When she performed the same test on a Velthrani subject, the results were different. After 3 hours, the Velthrani could reproduce only 60% of the symbols. After a week, only 20% remained. After a month, the Velthrani had forgotten the symbols entirely. The research team gathered in the main conference room of the institution. Representatives from 12 different species sat around the circular table, their diverse forms reflecting the incredible variety of intelligent life in the galaxy. There were the tall, graceful Velthrani with their silver skin, the massive stone-like Garati who communicated through vibrations in the floor, the tiny winged Sci-fi who floated above their chairs on delicate wings, and many others. Dr. Vrelix presented her findings. The room fell into complete silence. A Garati elder was the first to speak. His deep voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. He asked if the doctor was suggesting that humans never forget anything. Dr. Vrelix shook her head. She explained that humans did forget things, but not in the way other species did. Their forgetting was more about difficulty in retrieval, not actual loss of information. The memories were still there, buried deep in their neural architecture. With the right trigger, they could be brought back even after decades. A Sci-fi representative fluttered with agitation. She asked what this meant for the Confederation. How could they compete with a species that could accumulate knowledge indefinitely? The question hung in the air like a dark cloud. Dr. Vrelix had spent the last several months studying this exact question. What she had discovered was even more disturbing than the initial findings. Humans did not just form permanent memories. They built upon those memories in ways that other species could not. She brought up a new holographic display. It showed the brain scans of Marcus learning a complex medical concept. The first time he encountered the concept, certain pathways lit up in his brain. When he encountered a related concept later, those same pathways activated, and new pathways formed that connected the two pieces of information. Over time, Marcus developed an intricate web of interconnected knowledge that grew stronger and more complex with each new thing he learned. Other species learned in isolation. Each piece of knowledge existed separately, disconnected from other information. But humans built knowledge structures. They created mental frameworks that allowed them to apply old learning to new situations. They could see patterns that other species missed, make connections that seemed impossible. This was why humans had advanced so quickly after achieving spaceflight. In just 300 years, they had gone from their first satellite to a fully developed interstellar civilization. It had taken the Velthrani 2,000 years to achieve the same level of development. The Garati had needed 5,000 years. The Sci-fi were still struggling with certain technologies after 7,000 years of trying. The Confederation Council was informed of the findings immediately. An emergency session was called to discuss the implications. Some species called for humanity to be restricted, kept away from advanced technologies until the other species could catch up. Others argued for immediate alliance, hoping to benefit from human innovation. A few extremists even suggested more drastic measures. But Dr. Vrelix had one more piece of information to share. Something that changed everything. She had discovered that the human memory formation process was not automatic. It required effort. Humans had to choose to engage with information deeply for it to become permanent. They had to practice, to study, to repeat. Without conscious effort, their memories were just as temporary as any other species. The permanent pathways only formed through deliberate work. This meant that humans were not simply born superior. They had to earn their abilities through dedication and effort. Every human who mastered a skill had spent countless hours building those neural pathways. Every expert had chosen, day after day, to strengthen their knowledge. The Confederation Council debated for weeks. Finally, they reached a decision. Humans would not be restricted. Instead, they would be invited to share their learning methods with other species. Perhaps the key was not the biological mechanism itself, but the approach humans took to knowledge. Human teachers began arriving at educational institutions across the galaxy. They brought with them concepts that alien species had never considered. Space repetition, active recall, the importance of struggle in learning, the value of teaching others to reinforce one's own knowledge. Marcus Chun became one of these teachers. He traveled to a Velthrani university where students had always relied on chemical memory enhancers to retain information. He taught them something different. He taught them to engage with knowledge actively, to question and explore, to connect new information to what they already knew. The results were remarkable. Velthrani students who used human learning techniques showed improved retention even without their usual chemical assistance. Their memories did not become permanent like human memories, but they lasted longer and were more accessible than before. Similar results appeared across the galaxy. The Morphians reduced their dream state requirements by learning to consolidate information more efficiently while awake. The Sci-fi developed new study methods that helped them overcome their species' traditional learning limitations. Even the ancient Garati found value in human approaches to knowledge organization. Dr. Vrelix published her final research paper 3 years after beginning her study of human memory. Her conclusion surprised many in the scientific community. She wrote that human memory superiority was not truly about biology. It was about culture. Humans had evolved on a dangerous world where knowledge meant survival. They had developed a culture that valued learning, that celebrated expertise, that pushed individuals to grow and improve. Other species had become comfortable with their limitations. They had developed technologies to compensate for weak memories instead of strengthening their natural abilities. They had stopped pushing themselves to grow because they believed their biology made growth impossible. Humans had never accepted such limitations. When they encountered a barrier, they did not simply work around it. They pushed through it. They found ways to make their brains do what seemed impossible. They transformed themselves through pure will and effort. The galaxy was changing. For the first time in millennia, species that had thought their cognitive abilities were fixed were discovering new potential within themselves. Human learning techniques spread from world to world, adapted to different biologies and cultures, but always carrying the same core message. Growth was possible. Improvement was possible. The only true limitation was the choice to stop trying. Marcus returned to the Galactic Research Institution 5 years after his initial tests. Dr. Vrelix met him at the entrance, her four-fingered hand extended in the human gesture of greeting she had learned. She thanked him for everything humanity had given to the galaxy. Marcus just smiled and shook his head. He told her that humans had not given anything. They had just shared what they knew. That was what knowledge was for. Dr. Vrelix watched him walk away into the gleaming corridors of the institution. She thought about all the species across the galaxy who were now learning to push past their perceived limitations. She thought about the children on hundreds of worlds who were being taught that they could grow beyond what their parents had imagined possible. Humans had not conquered the galaxy with weapons or technology. They had done something far more profound. They had taught the galaxy to believe in itself. The permanent pathways that formed in human brains were remarkable, yes. But the real miracle was the pathways they were helping to form in the minds of every species they encountered. Not permanent, perhaps, but strengthened. Not perfect, but improved. Not human, but inspired by humanity's refusal to accept limitations. The stars seemed brighter somehow as Dr. Vrelix returned to her laboratory. There was so much more to learn, so many more species to study, so many more discoveries to make. And for the first time in her 300-year career, she felt something she had never experienced before. She felt like she was just beginning.